They thought she was weak. But when bikers mocked a disabled veteran in a diner, they never expected who would walk in 20 minutes later. What happened next left everyone speechless. The diner was one of those quiet little places people passed by without noticing, but locals loved it. The scent of bacon and pancakes lingered in the air. The bell above the door jingled softly whenever someone came in, and the low hum of casual chatter made it feel safe, warm, and ordinary. At the far end, by the large window where sunlight poured in, sat a woman in a wheelchair. She wore a faded military jacket and had a worn veteran's cap resting neatly on the table beside her cup of tea. Her hands were steady as she lifted the cup, though the wrinkles across her knuckles hinted at the battles she had fought long before this day. People knew her. Some respected her quietly, some didn't know her story at all. What no one expected was that she was about to be tested in a way that would silence the entire room. It started with the sound of engines outside, loud, rough, like thunder rolling in without warning. The bell above the diner door rattled hard as 5 men stormed in. Bikers, dressed in leather, sunglasses still on even though they had stepped indoors. Their laughter was coarse, their presence heavy, and the once peaceful diner shifted instantly. Conversations stopped, waitresses froze mid-step, and the atmosphere grew tight with unease. The bikers spread out like they owned the place, their boots heavy against the linoleum floor. At first, they were just noisy, slamming chairs, talking too loud, barking at the waitress for coffee. Some people looked down at their plates hoping to stay invisible. Others pretended to read their menus, though no one was really reading anything anymore. Then one of the bikers noticed her, the woman in the wheelchair, sitting silently, sipping her tea with quiet dignity. He nudged another and smirked, his voice low at first but rising with each word. "Look at this. Soldier girl," he sneered. "Bet she thought she was tough once." The others laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. One of them swaggered over to her table and leaned in close, his leather vest brushing the edge of her cup. "What happened, Granny?" "Couldn't hack it. Or did the war chew you up and spit you out?" His friends erupted again, their mocking bouncing off the walls. The woman didn't flinch. She placed her cup down gently and folded her hands in her lap. Her eyes, though, told another story. They were the eyes of someone who had stared down danger before, eyes that had seen fear and refused to be moved by it. She didn't answer right away. She simply looked at him as if she were weighing his soul, and that silence was heavier than any insult he could throw. But silence wasn't enough for him. He slammed his palm onto the table, making her tea spill over the edge of the saucer. Gasps rose from the nearby booths, but still no one moved. He leaned closer, his voice turning darker. "You fought for nothing. Look at you now, weak, forgotten. Nobody cares about your little stories." For a moment it seemed like she might lower her gaze, might let the cruelty slide past her the way others did. Instead, she straightened in her chair, her back proud, her shoulders firm, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, but carried the steel of a commander who had given orders under fire. "I fought for this country," she said evenly, "so people like you could have the freedom to run your mouth. You may think you're strong because you can push around a woman in a wheelchair, but don't mistake my silence for weakness. Strength isn't in the noise you make. Strength is what you carry when no one else can stand." Her words cut through the room like a blade. The diner was utterly still. Forks hovered mid-air, conversations completely dead, the only sound the faint buzzing of the neon sign outside. For the first time, one of the bikers hesitated, shifting uncomfortably under her steady gaze. But bravado dies hard. He forced a laugh and turned back to his friends. "Hear that, boys? She thinks she's still a soldier." He gave her chair a hard nudge with his boot, rolling it back slightly. "Newsflash, your war's over. You're nothing but broken parts now." Laughter exploded again, cruel and hollow, but it didn't shake her. She fixed her gaze on him, and this time there was a small smile, sad but proud. "Maybe, but I'd rather be broken from battle than whole from cowardice." The words struck harder than any fist. The biker's smirk faltered, just for a second, though he quickly masked it. The rest of the diner was frozen in awe. People wanted to clap, wanted to speak, but fear kept their mouths shut. The woman didn't look around for approval, didn't search for allies. She had fought wars without knowing if victory would come. This was no different. Unbeknownst to the bikers, however, her calm defiance had already lit a spark. They thought they had humiliated her. What they didn't know was that justice was already on its way, and when it arrived, their laughter would turn into the silence of shame. The bikers lingered in the diner like wolves circling prey, their laughter echoing off the walls as they continued to toy with the woman in the wheelchair. Every cruel remark, every shove of her chair, seemed to give them more confidence. Patrons kept their heads low, pretending to chew food they could no longer taste. Some clutched their coffee cups with nervous hands, others whispered quietly but dared not speak up. The waitresses exchanged worried glances but stayed frozen, too afraid of what might happen if they interfered. The atmosphere was suffocating, the kind of tension that made every second feel longer than it was. The woman sat tall in her chair, her face calm, her eyes sharp. She didn't retaliate, didn't raise her voice, but her composure itself was a kind of defiance. To her, this wasn't the first time she had stared down arrogance disguised as strength. But the crowd watching her had no idea that her silence was not surrender. It was the quiet before something much bigger. Minutes dragged on. 10, 15, nearly 20. The bikers grew restless, sensing no resistance from the room, and they began to turn their cruelty into entertainment. One picked up her cap from the table, twirling it in his fingers like a toy. Another mimicked her steady tone, exaggerating her words to draw laughter from the rest. The leader leaned close again, his breath thick with beer, whispering, "No one's coming to save you, lady. This world doesn't care about old soldiers." But just as the words left his mouth, the diner door opened. The bell jingled, soft, almost ordinary, but the presence that entered was anything but. 3 men stepped inside, not in uniforms, not in gear, but their bearing was unmistakable. They moved with quiet precision, their posture sharp, their eyes scanning the room in a single sweep. Broad shoulders filled their plain shirts, and though they dressed like ordinary travelers, their aura was heavy with something else: discipline, authority, danger kept carefully under control. Conversations didn't resume. They died entirely. Even the bikers paused mid-laugh, their amusement dimming under the weight of these new arrivals. The first man spotted the woman immediately. His eyes softened, recognition flashing like lightning. The second gave a short nod as though confirming what they had already expected. The third clenched his jaw when he noticed her wheelchair pushed slightly out of place and the cap no longer in her possession. They weren't strangers, they were brothers. Brothers forged not by blood, but by war, men who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with her in the darkest places of the world. They crossed the diner floor slowly, deliberately, their boots echoing in rhythm. The leader of the bikers tried to mask his unease with a smirk. "What, you 3 lost or something?" His voice wavered just enough for everyone to notice. One of the men, the tallest of the group, didn't answer. He simply reached out and rested a firm hand on the biker's shoulder. The contact wasn't violent, but it carried a weight that froze the biker in place. The SEAL's voice was low, steady, and dangerous in its calmness. "You just disrespected the wrong soldier." The biker blinked, the smirk faltering as his bravado cracked. His friends shifted uncomfortably, suddenly unsure of themselves. The diner's silence deepened. The woman's expression didn't change, but her eyes glistened ever so slightly, not with weakness, but with recognition. These were her men, her brothers in arms. The family she thought she had left behind had just walked through the door. The second SEAL bent down, picking up the cap the biker had tossed aside. He dusted it off with reverence and placed it gently back on the table in front of her. His voice was quieter, but every syllable carried weight. "Ma'am, we've got you." The bikers exchanged nervous glances. Their confidence, once inflated like a balloon, was quickly leaking air. They could feel it now, the shift in power, the invisible line they had crossed without knowing it. This wasn't a diner anymore. This was a battlefield of respect, and they were outnumbered before the fight even began. The tallest SEAL leaned closer to the biker whose shoulder he still held. "Do you have any idea who she is?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "She's the reason men like us came home alive. She carried us when the world tried to bury us, and you think mocking her makes you strong?" His tone never rose, but it struck harder than any shouted threat. The biker tried to shrug, to shake off the grip, but found himself unable. Not because of strength, though the SEAL's grip was unmovable, but because of the realization creeping into his chest. He wasn't in control anymore. Around them, the diner remained motionless, every pair of eyes locked on the scene. The crowd that had been silent with fear now sat frozen with anticipation. Something was unfolding before them, something that felt larger than life. The woman in the wheelchair finally spoke, her voice calm as ever. "I told you not to mistake silence for weakness." She turned her eyes to the bikers and then to the men standing beside her. "And I never fight alone." Those words sealed the moment. The bikers, who had entered the diner with noise and swagger, now stood cornered by nothing more than truth, loyalty, and the kind of authority that can't be faked. And though fists had yet to fly, the lesson was already beginning to take root. The diner seemed to hold its breath. The bikers, once so loud and arrogant, now stood stiff and uneasy under the unflinching stares of the three men beside the veteran. No one moved, no one spoke, yet the silence itself was heavier than thunder. The SEALs didn't need weapons or raised voices. Their calm presence carried more authority than a dozen policemen could have in that moment. The leader of the bikers tried to recover his bravado, straightening his vest and puffing his chest. "We didn't mean nothing by it," he muttered, his tone uncertain. But his attempt at casual dismissal only drew a cold stare from the tallest SEAL, the one whose hand still rested firmly on his shoulder. The grip tightened, not painfully, but with enough pressure to remind him he wasn't in control anymore. "You mocked a woman who has more courage in her little finger than you've ever known in your whole life," the SEAL said, his voice steady, deliberate, each word hitting like a hammer on steel. "She stood where bullets fell, where brothers bled, where every step could have been her last. She carried us when we couldn't carry ourselves. And you thought humiliating her made you powerful?" The biker's smirk disappeared entirely. His mouth opened, then closed again, as though no words could form. His friends shifted in their boots, fidgeting, avoiding the gaze of the room that now burned into them with judgment. The second SEAL leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his voice quieter but laced with sharp truth. "Strength isn't about the noise you make when no one challenges you. Strength is about who you are when everything falls apart. She proved her strength long before you ever rolled your bikes into this town. You don't even know the meaning of the word." The third SEAL finally spoke, his tone softer, directed at the woman in the wheelchair rather than the bikers. "Ma'am, forgive them. They don't know what it means to sacrifice. They don't know what it means to serve." His words weren't just for her. They were a blade of shame cutting into the biker's pride. The woman sat still, her eyes unwavering. She hadn't asked for help, hadn't called for backup, but seeing her old brothers in arms beside her brought a quiet comfort. She lifted her cap from the table, resting it gently on her lap, and said in her calm, commanding tone, "Men like these think respect is owed, but respect is earned, and when they've lived a life worth remembering, maybe then they'll understand what that means." The diner erupted into whispers of agreement. A man at the counter muttered, "She's right." A waitress, who had been frozen with fear moments earlier, nodded with tears in her eyes. The bikers felt the weight of every gaze, no longer intimidated by them, but disgusted by them. The leader tried one last time to salvage his pride. "We don't need a lecture. We were just having fun." But his words fell flat. No one laughed. Not even his own crew. The SEAL, who still gripped his shoulder, leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the room. "Fun?" he asked. "Fun is the sound of your daughter laughing when you come home safe. Fun is knowing the people you love can sleep peacefully because men and women like her fought to keep it that way. If you think tearing down a veteran is fun, then you've already lost more than you know." The biker swallowed hard. For the first time, shame colored his face. Slowly, the SEAL released his shoulder, but the weight of those words lingered far heavier than the grip. One by one, the bikers backed toward the door. Their boots, once stomping with arrogance, now shuffled awkwardly across the floor. The engines outside roared to life, but it wasn't triumph that carried them away. It was retreat. They didn't look back, didn't throw insults over their shoulders. They simply left, shadows of the bullies they had been minutes earlier. As the door shut behind them, the diner broke into applause. It wasn't loud at first, just a few claps from a table in the back. Then more joined, and soon the whole room erupted in cheers. Not for the bikers' departure, not even entirely for the SEALs. The applause was for the woman who had sat there, unshaken, dignified, refusing to let cruelty bend her spirit. The SEALs didn't bow, didn't wave, didn't take credit. Instead, they turned to her, their faces softening. The tallest one crouched slightly so he was level with her chair. "Ma'am," he said quietly, almost reverently, "we've got your six, always." Her eyes glistened, but she held back tears. Instead, she smiled faintly, the kind of smile only a soldier could wear after a lifetime of scars and victories. She nodded once, her chin high. "I know you do," she whispered. In that moment, the diner wasn't just a small-town eatery anymore. It was a place of witness, where ordinary people had seen what true strength looked like. Not the kind that rides in with noise and swagger, but the kind that sits quietly in a wheelchair, shoulders straight, courage unbroken. The lesson lingered long after the engines faded down the road. The people in that diner would tell the story for years. Not about the bikers who tried to bully, but about the woman who refused to bend and the brothers who reminded everyone what loyalty and honor truly mean. And for those who witnessed it, one truth remained carved into their hearts. Noise fades, arrogance crumbles, but respect, earned through sacrifice, echoes forever.